Once upon a time, not so very long ago, Aspen Grove, Clearwater Spring, Basalt Cliffs, Marsh Pond and Cottonwood waited patiently for the night stories to begin. The sweet smells of wild rose and cottonwood became part of gentle wind, greeting everyone that came for the stories. Ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and cedar stood nearby with granite hillside, floodstone, and Spokane River in the warm colors of the late afternoon sun. Meadowlark, robin, woodpecker, duck, and magpie were singing, chirping, drumming, quacking, and chattering about the night's stories. Hummingbird, butterfly, and swallow sky danced within listening distance. A bit of pellucid dust carried by gentle wind settled on Marsh Pond rock. Owls' yellow eyes blinked to see who had come for the stories. White-tailed deer, mule deer, and elk walked along the trails to Aspen Grove. Moose, mountain lion, and black bear neared pine, fir, and cedar. Playful coyote set to surprise marmot by waiting above marmot's den. But marmot surprised coyote with a high-pitched squeak from a den just above coyote's ear. Hawk, eagle, and osprey, soaring high in evening sky, saw a newcomer in the distance. Wild grass, bunchgrass, cattail, and tule swayed as gentle breeze quaked aspen leaves and rustled pine needles. Wild rose, ladybug, cricket, and ant watched Time Mountain practice showing the 8 trails of Time Trail, ancient time, the 3 old times, the 3 young times, and recent time. Each magnification displayed a new time, but never revealed more than 5 feet of the mountain. Ladybug asked, "Why only 5 feet of Time Mountain never shown?" "Because that is Wild Rose height," replied Wild Rose. "To show all of Time Trail, older time would be 88 feet high, younger time would be 195 miles high, and recent time would be 1,000 miles high. That is too much to see all at once. Besides, no rose can grow for 1,000 miles. That is almost the distance from Phoenix to Spokane. Much too far. A rose petal would be bigger than a city." Camas, balsamroot, bitterroot, and wapato listened for the stories carried by gentle wind. Memory of dinosaur, memory of woolly mammoth, memory of saber-toothed tiger, memory of giant sloth, memory of short-faced bear, and memory of salmon had all come for the night stories. Great blue heron's wings flowed through light blue cloudless sky. Far below Blue's wings, newcomer walked along a trail towards Aspen Grove. We have all been newcomers. We all have migrated, some much farther than others, thought Great Blue, as Blue landed on Marsh Pond rock, pushing ever so little pellucid dust and Marsh Pond rock dust into Marsh Pond. The migrating dust was now part of Marsh Pond and Grove Creek. As late afternoon shadows grew longer, red-winged blackbird, crow, wildgrass, and tule talked of this night's stories. Redwing said, "Even though we've heard these stories many times over the ages, each telling brings fresh differences with new meanings to explore." "Yes," said Tule, "each time becomes a new adventure. We listen and talk as though we are newcomers. I enjoy it when we take turns being many questions, or storyteller, or that's impossible," said Wildgrass. "Let's listen to Bunchgrass explain Great Blue stories to hummingbirds," said Crow. "They've been heard and told these explanations many times before. Now they will create this moment." Bunchgrass began. "It is said there is a great blue heron, a creature of mythic proportions, who has lived through the ages of time and has seen the many changes of our magnificent nature corridor. This bird's name is Great Blue, or Blue to close friends. Over the years, Great Blue has seen many interesting, amazing, and unexpected events of our incredible planet. Great Blue likes to tell stories of our history, some gently admonishing, and Blue especially likes questions." "What kind of questions?" asked Hummingbird. "Blue likes questions," replied Bunchgrass, "about how one can creatively adapt to changing circumstances. What can be seen, touched, tasted, heard, and felt in a particular situation? What can one choose to do according to their aspirations under these conditions? What are the conditions? What conditions, then, now, and in the future, can be enriched? Are a few of the questions Blue likes to hear and ask. Where does the name Great Blue come from? Asked Hummingbird. These are a few of the stories about where the name Great Blue came from, said Bunchgrass. One story says the name comes from a great blue heron that first told these stories. Another story says these stories were only told during a great blue moon. One story says the name came from our great blue skies. Another story says the name came from a great blue lake. And one story says the name came from the incredible number of great world events unique to our nature corridor that seem to come right out of the blue. No one knows for sure, but most everyone knows a great blue heron's story when they hear one. By tradition, someone speaks as Great Blue. Last time I heard the stories, Ant told most of the Great Blue stories. This time, Great Blue Heron will tell most of the stories. This is some of what I know about Great Blue stories, said Bunchgrass to Hummingbird. They looked across Marsh Pond to see Frog and Turtle move quickly to the shadows as Great Blue Heron drank from Marsh Pond. Heron was now part of the Marsh Pond, and Marsh Pond was part of Heron. Remember the story when Basalt divided into factions? Said Wild Rose. Or the pile of garbage story Marmot called out from above Coyote's nose? It was now early evening. Newcomers set the backpack against Aspen and drank from clear spring water. Gentle wind moved across the water, and aspen leaves quaked. Looking up from the water in surprise, Newcomer thought, that sounded like the sneeze of a giant bird. The first Great Blue story had started. "Ah-choo!" began Blue, the loudest sneeze ever heard, at 3:33 in the early morning. Woke me up from the middle of a great dream. I remember that sneeze well. March 3rd, 18,003,000,003 BC. The sneeze echoed out into the universe, scattering stardust in every possible direction. No one has ever figured out who sneezed. Some say it was a big bang, not a sneeze, but it sounded like a sneeze to me. If you listen carefully, a faint echo of the sneeze can still be heard. That sneeze is 4 times older than all of Earth's time. It is like walking the 1,000-mile time trail 4 times. 2 round trips to Phoenix, or walking from Panama to Guatemala to Phoenix, and on to Spokane. That is a long, long, long time. It was 13 billion years later when the next story started. That's the story of Earth and Spokane Nature Corridor beginning, said Great Blue. Why do so many of Great Blue's numbers end in 3? Marmot asked Meadowlark. Blue is very conscientious and precise whenever possible, replied Meadowlark. When dates or numbers are used, Blue makes sure they are accurate. When Blue ends a number or date with a 3, it is to show that this is a rough estimate. No one has yet shown Great Blue's dates and numbers to be significantly inaccurate. How was 3 chosen? Asked Marmot. 0 is a comfortable way to end numbers. Yes, said Meadowlark. 0 has almost become too comfortable a number. Too often a number ending 0 is thought to be accurate when it is a rough estimate or even a wild guess. Even Plato overused 0. But that's a story for later this night. Newcomer had been curious about the stories of how our Spokane Nature Corridor had evolved and decided to stay for the night in Aspen Grove. Newcomer heard Bunchgrass say, "Tell the Stardust story." And Great Blue began the Stardust story. Stardust, swirling, sparkling stardust from long ago, disintegrated stars scattering themselves across the universe, condensed as a raindrop into our planet. At 1:23 in the afternoon on a warm spring day without a cloud in the sky, Earth began to form itself. It was the 3rd Wednesday of April, back in 4,600,000,003 BC. That was quite a day. It had been quiet, too quiet, more than 13 billion years since the big sneeze, almost 3 times Earth's age without any stories. After 13 billion years of silence, I was ready for almost anything. Great Blue could not have possibly been around when Earth was born, said red-winged blackbird. Where could a blue heron have landed before Earth was born? I'm sure Blue was here when Earth was born, said Hawk. How else could these stories have been remembered from such a long time ago? Anyone that was around for the big sneeze certainly was around for the beginning of the Spokane Nature Corridor, croaked Frog. Great Blue continued the tale. I watched in amazement as land, mountain, waters, weather, wind, fire, plants, animals, life formed themselves from the swirling stardust. I decided this great adventure would certainly be worth joining. The banter of the listeners started again. Cricket claimed life came from primal ooze. Life couldn't come from mere dust. If life came from dust, then I'm dust. No. That is just not possible, period, Cricket said with great authority. Blue smiled and asked before flying to perch on a heron-worn ponderosa pine limb, "Where did this fine ooze come from, my friend?" Ah, impertinent question, thought Wild Grass. How could a pristine lake or a giant ancient tree possibly be made from stardust? Asked Wild Grass. Blue replied, how else could they twinkle, sparkle, and glisten if they were not made of stardust? Wild Grass was not quite sure if Blue was serious. Yet Wild Grass knew that Great Blue often refers with affection to a particular ancient tree or rock or person as a twinkle of stardust. Bunchgrass said to Hummingbird, "Some think Great Blue questions are silly and unbecoming for a bird of Blue's stature. Others think the questions are unanswerable and wonder why Blue insists on asking them. Still others like to make up stories to answer the questions and even ask questions of their own. Those are who Blue likes to talk to the most. Blue loves a good story, especially one that does more than merely entertain." After Earth and the Spokane Nature Corridor formed themselves, then what happened? Asked Swallowtail Butterfly. 2,700,000,003 BC, Spokane Nature Corridor, basement rocks. Almost 2 billion years passed quickly without many stories, continued Great Blue. Geologists call this time the Archean Eon. What's an Archeon? Magpie asked. Archeon comes from a Greek word meaning old or ancient or beginning, and eon means time. This is another way to say earliest time, replied Blue. Geologists call this the time before plant or animal life evolved. Almost half of Earth's history had gone by with very few traces of plants and animals. There were a few bubbles of oxygen and lots of lightning. What about the rocks? Asked Floodstone. Ah, now we're talking movement, said Great Blue. The crust of Earth and our Spokane Nature Corridor started forming more than 3 billion years ago. The oldest known rocks near here are 2.7 billion years old. They live below Earth's crust and are called basement rocks. Asking about the rocks was a good question, said Bunchgrass to Hummingbird. How can I create good questions? Asked Hummingbird. How does Blue ask questions? Great Blue flies to many vantage points to ask questions, answered Bunchgrass. Isn't one viewpoint enough? Asked Hummingbird. That reminds me of the Great Blue story about a bird that confidently claimed the view from one perch was more than enough, said Bunchgrass. I can see everything quite well from this one view, said the well-feathered bird. My one viewpoint has worked well for many years. This bird was sure the one perch was perfectly fine until one day someone suggested, at least you can look at what is behind you. Bunchgrass continued, you can tell stories from many different perches, perspectives, or points of time. To try out ideas and see what can happen, you can create a Great Blue story. From each perch you can view what can happen in certain situations. Test out a perch. Play with it. See what can evolve over time. Then set aside these stories and fly to another perch and start again. See where the ideas go. You can be more than a one-perch bird. If two perches are better than one, then hundreds or even thousands of viewpoints would be even better, proclaimed Hummingbird. Not quite, said Bunchgrass. That is not unlike thinking a few drops of water tasted good, so drinking a waterfall will be even better. Then how do you know how many views to look from? Asked Hummingbird. I could spend all day going from view to view. When you have seen enough, answered Bunchgrass. Enough? Said Hummingbird. How much is enough? One of Blue's favorite words is empirical. To verify based on experience and observation, said Bunchgrass. Blue likes to verify thoughts, comments, ideas, and insights empirically. What works? What does not work? How can it be repeated? Are you sure? Have you checked? Are not unusual questions asked by Great Blue. When these questions can be answered, then you will know better how much is enough. Blue asked those who think they know what empirical means. Can you simply observe and report back what you heard, what you felt, and what went on before your eyes? Can you pay attention? How can you make sense of what you have actually experienced? Hummingbird said to Bunchgrass, empirical makes sense to me. I use it all the time. I like to be sure what looks like a flower really is a flower, and it really does have nectar. I usually look just enough to make sure I see a flower, and not just a pretty color. It takes more than one perch to find good flowers. I can hover in midair and turn to see in any direction, then quickly go to another midair perch. How do you find vantage points, Bunchgrass? Bunchgrass said, my friend Gentle Wind moves each grass blade, giving me wide views. And look at Rattlesnake enjoying the end-of-day warmth from the rocks, said Hummingbird. From your viewpoint, Rattlesnake, what do you see about the movement of rocks? Rocks don't move, they just sit there, said Rattlesnake. Basalt and Floodstone smiled as they remembered their stories and how much they had moved throughout time. Listen to the next story if you think rocks don't move, said Blue. Whole continents move and have yet to consider stopping or even slowing down. Blue flew to clear spring water to tell the next story. Perched on one leg, feathers adjusted, Blue began the story of when Spokane was on the Pacific coast. Oldest time, 590,000,003 BC. Spokane along the Pacific Ocean. Another 2 billion years passed after the time of the first basement rocks, said Great Blue. At 1.5 billion years ago, water plants, soft-bodied animals, and insects began evolving themselves near Spokane. New basement rocks developed themselves. Up until 1.4 billion years ago, ancient North America and Asia were part of one large supercontinent, but they developed a rift and tore themselves apart. This rift was like today's rift in the Red Sea that is splitting Saudi Arabia and Africa away from each other. What kind of rock made up ancient North America? Asked Serviceberry. Hard rock, said Blue. Solid rock, like granite. Much harder and more stable than basalt. Rushing water can easily disintegrate basalt. Dry Falls is a good example of this. That is one reason why Grand Coulee Dam was built on the hard rock of ancient North America instead of the basalt nearby. Over the next 600 million years, ancient North America and Asia moved farther away from each other, creating the Pacific Ocean. Most of the other continents were forming a larger supercontinent called Gondwana. By 590 million BC, Spokane was along the Pacific Ocean. Pacific Ocean waves washed the beaches near Spokane. Spokane was on the Pacific coast of the ancient North American continent, said Gray Blue. Wapato added, I've heard it said that Spokane was up to 100 feet under the Pacific Ocean, and that only Mount Spokane and the surrounding hills were above sea level. Some say there are remnants of oyster beds in the hills above Latah, said Pheasant. Seashells have been found there. Blue continued, the Selkirk Mountains from British Columbia to Spokane, the Dishman Mica Hills, Steptoe Butte, Kamiak Butte, and the Blue Mountains of the eastern Washington-Oregon border were all part of the edge of the ancient North American continent along the Pacific Ocean. Not only had the moving continents created the Pacific Ocean, but plant and animal life was evolving. More water plants and land plants started to appear. Then animals with hard shells became common. This was the start of what the geologists called the Cambrian era, said Great Blue. What does Cambrian mean? Asked Magpie. Cambrian is the Welsh word for what is now called Wales. Wales is where rocks from this point of time were explored, said Blue. Just think, if the rocks were explored near Ritzville, said Magpie, we could call this period the Ritzville era. The next story, when fish became abundant, is for memory of salmon, said Great Blue. Hold on, said Swallowtail Butterfly. We have now covered more than 4 billion years, most of our nature corridor's time. There are stories missing. Yeah, said Sagebrush. We've traveled time trail from Phoenix to Walla Walla and only glimpsed a point of time near Salt Lake City. There is less than 130 miles of our 1,000-mile trip to go. On the 10-hour time trail clock, said Robin, most of the 10 hours is gone. It would be 3:43 in the morning, less than 1 hour and 20 minutes till dawn. But it's not yet dark enough to see the night stars. There's lots of time to tell stories, said Sagebrush. We've spent so little time on most of our history, we now have the rest of the night for the last 600 million years, said Robin. But that is like telling a story of a year of your life and only talking about 1 month of the year, said Swallowtail. You're right, said Great Blue. We have skipped much of time and many stories. Many more stories will be skipped before this night's last story, just before dawn. Sometime these stories, too, can be told. But now I'll tell the story of fish and ferns. 360 million BC, fish and ferns appear. It may have taken almost 4 billion years for Pacific coast self-development, said Great Blue, but fish and fern worked much quicker. In a brief 230 million years, our friends, fish and fern, had created themselves. Now there was an abundance of fish swimming in the Pacific Ocean. Pacific coast had ferns growing in hills and valleys. The continents, said Great Blue, as usual, were moving across the face of Earth. There were 2 supercontinents, Laurussia and Gondwana, and they were now on a collision course with each other. North Asia, North Europe, Scotland, Greenland, and North America had joined to form the smallest continent, Laurussia. The giant Gondwana, most of Earth's landmass, included Africa, India, South Europe, the Middle East, Australia, Antarctica, and South America. North America was on its way to be the South Pole. Scarves, grooves, and scratches on desert rocks are reminders of when the massive South Pole glaciers moved across Algeria. The 2 supercontinents advanced towards each other at the speed of 2.5 inches per year. 40 miles every million years. Quite fast if you're a continent. In the 230 million years of fish and ferns, a continent could migrate more than 1/3 of the way around Earth. 230 million years is a long time to me, and 4 billion years sounds like forever, said Ant. 4 billion years, said Time Mountain, is the first 872 miles of time trail from Phoenix to Walla Walla. This is a lot of Earth's time. There are only 128 miles left to go to Spokane. The next 50 miles from Walla Walla to Lewiston is 230 million miles. There is just enough time for fish and fern to work with. About 30 minutes on the time trail clock. But that leaves only 78 miles until today. Less than 50 minutes till dawn, said Ant. That seems way too short for ponderosa pine, dinosaur, and saber-toothed tiger to create themselves. How could so much time go by to create fish and fern, and so little remains to create everyone else? Wait just a minute, Ant, said Ladybug. Miles are too big for me. Let Time Mountain show me a 5-foot mountaintop so I can better see fish and ferns 230 million years. Time Mountain said no problem and quickly shrank 1,000 miles into Oldest Mountain, 29 feet high, with only the top 5 feet for Ladybug to see. Now I can see where fish and ferns started, said Ladybug. Pacific coast is just over 1 foot high. Fish and ferns are almost 3 feet high. And today is 5 feet high on Oldest Mountain. And hidden 29 feet below the top of Oldest Time Mountain is when Earth and the Spokane Nature Corridor were born, said Time Mountain. See that? Said Ant. Fish and fern. Almost 2 feet of time. There's little more than 2 feet left for everyone else. It's impossible, just impossible. How could everyone else have such little time to do so much? Ant's feet felt Earth vibrate as basement rocks began to speak. Took me 2.7 billion years to develop myself, said Basement Rock. More than half of Earth's time, 16 feet on Oldest Mountain. That's a long time. Pacific Coast and Pacific Ocean built on me and used their skills and knowledge to create themselves in less than 2 billion years. Using what they learned from me, Pacific Coast and Pacific Ocean, fish and fern and with their skills and knowledge created themselves in a short 230 million years. And those that came after fish and fern used this encyclopedia of self-development and their skills and knowledge to create themselves. It may take a long time to create knowledge, but once it is created, everyone can use this knowledge in an instant. And everyone adds a little more knowledge to Time's encyclopedia each day, said Basement Rock. A better question to ask, said Basement Rock to Ant, is, how did it take everyone else so much time to get to where they are? Or better still, just imagine what can be done with a small amount of time and the vast wealth of knowledge we have created so far. Ant thought about what a long time is, as Great Blue continued the story of fern and fish. Moss, too, had spent many years developing, said Blue. Fern had learned much from moss. Coral used some of Encyclopedia's knowledge to spread throughout the oceans. Frogs' ancestors, amphibians, were just beginning to develop. They used the knowledge of fish, fern, and others before, so they could live in water and on land. A few plants, and these amphibians had created this knowledge that others would soon use, and that brings us to the story of lizards' ancestors. Before Great Blue began this story, Blue looked up to see first star of night sky twinkling. Newcomer had finished dinner as Lizard's story was about to begin. Owl thought of the dawn that would soon come, and then the night stories would be over. Blue flew to a perch high in Cottonwood to begin the next story. Older time. 248,003 BC. Reptiles arrive. Great Blue began. Reptiles, lizard, and rattlesnake's ancestors evolved over the next 120 million years. They used the knowledge of living on land well. They watched as pine forest ancestor, conifer, used past knowledge to evolve into forests. There were deserts, areas where reptiles developed themselves to look like mammals. "What?" said Coyote. "How could a lizard look like me? I have soft fur and lizard has scales for skin. That's impossible." "Would a coyote reptile try to surprise me?" asked Marmot. "It's not impossible," said Wild Rose. "Lizard has 4 legs, 2 eyes, and a tail like you, Coyote." Certainly, with all the knowledge back then, reptile could have evolved to look not much different than you. A reptile with bigger bones, ears, and a long nose could make a fine coyote reptile. Blue continued. But something happened toward the end of this time. Most of the animals and some of the plants disappeared. No one is quite sure what happened. "Perhaps they forgot to use Time's encyclopedia," said Quail. Near this point in time, said Great Blue, the ever-moving continents had collided. La Russia and Gondwana crashed into each other, creating the supercontinent Pangaea. This collision pushed Rocky Mountains high up so they could look out over ancient North America continent to the Pacific Ocean. Other mountains of our planet formed themselves too, the Appalachian Mountains of eastern North America and the highlands of Central Europe. Glaciers covered India, South Africa, South America, and Australia. Perhaps the collision of the continents added to the disappearance of so many of our ancestors, said Great Blue. Geologists call this point of time the end of the Paleozoic era. Is Paleo the name of a place, or is it another name for long ago? Asked Magpie. Paleo comes from a Greek word meaning old or ancient, said Great Blue. Paleozoic means life from far off times. Blue continued. The next stories are no less wondrous than these stories, even though so many of our ancestors have disappeared. And what can be as wondrous as a coyote reptile or continents colliding? Asked newcomer, settling in for the night's stories. The star-filled night sky arrived. Ah, said Great Blue, as Blue flew to a perch on Granite Hillside of ancient North American continent. That is the story of our ancestors, dinosaur, forest, and bird. And Blue began the story of the time of dinosaur. 144,000,003 BC. Dinosaurs, forests, and birds appear. For the next 48 million years, I watched dinosaurs develop themselves, said Great Blue. By 200 million BC, dinosaurs had created themselves. Many roamed across the lands now called Montana and Wyoming. They were great healthy giants enjoying the lush green lands. Today, some say the dinosaurs were great giant reptiles. Others say they were more like giant birds with hollow bones and scales that were more like feathers. In the Pacific Ocean, shellfish developed with many varieties of shells. Some shells were giant spirals. They were ancestors of nautilus, said Blue. Great conifer and cicada forests developed themselves along with dinosaurs and many other reptiles, said Great Blue. Tell me, asked Magpie. I know what a forest is, but what kind of a tree is a conifer and a cicada? Ponderosa Pine replied, Conifer is from 2 Latin words. Fir comes from the word that means to bear, to bring forth, and coni means cone. Together they mean trees with cones, like pine trees and their pine cones, or fir trees and their fir cones. And cicada comes from a Greek word meaning palm. Ponderosa Pine, sometimes you amaze me, said Magpie. Not only can you make cooling shade, but you know words from Latin and Greek. Then Owl said, from many tiny plants and animals to giant trees and dinosaurs, all in less than 50 million years. Who could have thought that such magnificent creatures could come after the time of fish and ferns? Huh. That reminds me, said Great Blue, of the story of flying people that I once told to Forest and Dinosaur. Near Mount Spokane, I predicted that one day people would fly across the Pacific Ocean to a place called China. Many did not believe me. How could someone that can only walk on 2 legs ever fly? Some asked. Others remembered Time's encyclopedia and thought, many more incredible things have happened. This too might happen, but it is doubtful. That would be like lizard or rattlesnake flying with the clouds. Then Bird appeared, said Great Blue, flying up to the clouds, across the sky, perching in forest tree, and even on Dinosaur's back. The doubters began to doubt their doubts. How did Blue know how to make feathers? Asked Turtle. I know that story, said Balsam Root. Birds develop wings the same way. Conifer developed cones. Their fish learned how to live in water. They used knowledge from encyclopedia, and they experimented. Well, it wasn't exactly an experiment, it was more of an accident. A tribe of lizards had set out to figure out how to fly. As usual, everyone else said, that's impossible. Lizards can't fly. But they were a dedicated tribe. One bright-looking lizard said, the way to fly is to leap. So this tribe became famous for its ability to leap. They could leap from rocks to trees, from one tree to another, and across creeks, with only an occasional disaster. No one could leap as far as this tribe could, but they could not fly. Then one day a new lizard came to join the tribe. This lizard could leap further than any of the lizard tribe. But the lizard tribe refused the new lizard. They said, you can't join the lizard tribe. You do not even look like a proper lizard. Instead of scales, you have feathers. Your bones are too light in weight. No, you'll never do. Few of the lizard tribe thought, we once were the lizard tribe that was going to learn how to fly. And now when someone shows us how we can come close to flying, we refuse to learn. We have forgotten what we intend to do. They left this lizard tribe to work with a feathered lizard. As they left, they renamed their old tribe the Leaping Lizards. In no time, the feathered tribe could fly. They named themselves Bird. And that is a story of Bird, said Balsam Root. Not only was Bird flying across the sky, said Great Blue, but our ever-moving friends' continents were developing more rifts. Supercontinent Pangaea began to separate into South America, Europe, and Africa. Continents had moved even further by the time of the next story. This next story is about the time when Dinosaur disappeared, said Great Blue. Blue flew back to Marsh Pond to begin the story. 66,000,003 BC. Dinosaurs disappear. Over the next 182 million years, Blue continued, I watched the supercontinent Pangaea break up. North America and Eurasia rifted their separate ways. South America and Africa continued moving away from each other. South America and North America were moving to join with Central America so they could develop themselves into the Americas. Australia and Antarctica, as one large continent, separated from Africa. And India left Africa for a 4,000-mile journey to help build the Himalayas and the Earth's highest mountain, Mount Everest. But that is a story at another point of time. During this point of time, said Great Blue, 2 mini continents migrated to our Spokane Nature Corridor. The Okanagan moved into the north, and the Walla Walla Mountains moved into the south. Even a few volcanoes started to become active. Don't continents ever get tired migrating all the time? Asked Bear. Why don't they take a rest or hibernate for the winter? Bear's feet felt earth vibrate as basement rocks replied. That's like asking you, Bear. Don't you get tired of breathing? Why don't you take a rest and hibernate your breathing for a while? Continents move and bears breathe. Bear continued breathing as Great Blue continued the story. During this time, said Blue, I saw a most unusual plant develop itself. Flowering plants appeared. Flowers, not unlike balsam root, bitterroot, and camas, brought ever more color and variety to our home. Mountain Lion said, I'll bet Flower used encyclopedia quite well. Probably learned a lot from birds, said Elk. Yes, I think so, said Doug Fir. And bird also help flower by spreading pollen between flowers. Also, at this point of time, butterfly, moth, bee, wasp, and ant developed themselves with the help of flower. And they help flower develop. Tell the butterfly story, said Elk. Once upon a time, said Doug Fir, butterfly flew in a straight line, slowly, from one flower to the next. One day a butterfly appeared that slowly zigzagged through the air. A few of the straight-line flyers made fun of zigzag. Others learned how to fly this way. Then bird came looking for lunch. The zigzag flyers lived to fly slowly on to other flowers. Doug Fir continued. Flowers' many different wonderful scents, some like wild rose, attracted these new insects. As they fed on the pollen, they would cross-pollinate other flowers, some a great distance away. This is one way flower migrated throughout our Spokane Nature Corridor. Don't forget gentle breeze, said Hummingbird. Without gentle breeze, it would have been difficult for seed to migrate as far. And what about our friends, water, sun, moon, and sky? They help too, asked Ponderosa Pine. Everyone knows we all are connected, said Cricket. Just take a look. Listing all the connections and connections of connections could go on forever. Let's go back to the story. Great Blue continued. At the end of this point of time, called the Cretaceous period, many plants and animals disappeared. The dinosaurs? Magpie interrupted Blue with, is that word Creta the name of a place or a description? It is both, replied Blue. On the island of Crete, rocks from this point of time were explored. The Latin word Crete means chalk. Chalk is abundant on this island. The word Crete is also where the word crayon came from. I see, said Magpie. Chalk Island brought us the Cretaceous period. I wonder if the people who live on this island are called chalk people. If the exploration had been done on the Palouse, we could call this point of time the Palusiosis period. Blue continued. One day, these great giants vanished from our land. I looked high and low, but did not find one dinosaur. How could these magnificent creatures disappear from our planet? I'll tell one of the dinosaur stories, said Basalt. And I'll tell another one, said Meadowlark. Basalt began. Once upon a time, about 66 million years ago, a tribe of dinosaurs found glittering stones. Some say they were diamonds. They collected them and sought them out far and wide. Many dinosaurs wished to have even more diamonds. They thought those with the most diamonds were most special. Except for this tribe, no one else gave diamonds much thought. Little did the diamond collectors know that a giant diamond asteroid and Earth were on collision course. Diamond asteroid was not small. It was more than 5 miles across, weighing more than 500 billion tons. Diamond asteroid was moving at more than 25 miles per second when it smashed into Earth near Yucatan, Mexico. The crash scattered fine diamond particles all over Earth, which can be found today. But much worse for dinosaur, there were colossal tidal waves. Then and diamond dust darkened the skies, creating a winter so cold that forests were suddenly freeze-dried, and they burst into flame with a bolt of lightning. Nitric acid rain leached poisonous heavy metals from rocks into the drinking water. Poor dinosaur frozen, burnt, poisoned, and drowned. Some call this the worst weekend in history. Others say this is where the phrase "diamonds are forever" came from. Some say it is best to be careful with your wishes. They may come true. Some say it was a comet that crashed, and others say this is just a story. Basalt continued. This was the largest single force ever to strike Earth, 4 times larger than the largest volcanic eruption, the Santorini explosion in 1475 BC. This explosion blew up most of an island in the Aegean Sea between Greece and Turkey. This is the story of Plato's adding zeros to dates. It can be told later in the night. Our Spokane Nature Corridor had a series of events with almost twice the force of diamond asteroids crashing, starting in the year 13,123 BC. This story of great floods is also for later in the night, said Basalt, finishing the story of Dinosaurs' demise. There is also, said Meadowlark, the story of the Ice Age that is said to explain the disappearance of dinosaurs and many other plants and animals, all at this point of time. According to this story, cold weather and migrating glaciers were too much for these plants and animals to survive. Blue continued, quickly after the dinosaurs disappeared, an ice age did begin. Or perhaps this ice age was just before the dinosaurs disappeared, said Meadowlark. This point of time is by no means more earth-moving than the next point of time, said Great Blue. Blue flew to near Moose and Mountain Lion to tell of the point of time when North Cascade Mountains arrived. Old time. 38,003 BC. North Cascade Micro Continent arrives, Mountain Lion said to Great Blue. And what did the next point of time bring? As the dinosaur ice age melted away, said Blue, the cooler climate was just right for bird and mammal to flourish. They developed themselves into all sorts of new species. The first monkeys appeared, even flowering plants experimented with more shapes, sizes, colors, and kinds. I too like cool weather, said Moose. While bird, mammal, and flowering plant enjoyed the weather, what were our friends, the migrating continents, up to? The microcontinent North Cascade, said Great Blue, migrated through Pacific Ocean to our nature corridor. As part of North America, North Cascade continued to develop and became a good place for moose to enjoy and explore. Today, the North Cascades are a unique granite wilderness next to the volcanic Cascade Mountains. Australia and Antarctica separated. Antarctica migrated further south. Small glaciers began to develop as Antarctica moved towards the South Pole. Like Australia and Antarctica's separate paths, a part of Idaho that had broken off long ago was now migrating with Alaska far to the north. India had journeyed along a path of more than 4,000 miles to push hard into Asia. India did not dock as gently as North Cascades had. India pushed hard against Asia, lifting the Himalayas high into the sky. Mount Everest, the world's highest peak, grew to almost 6 miles high, almost twice as high as Mount Rainier. And I thought migrating to lowlands in the winter and back to highlands in the summer was a long way, said Moose. I wonder where migrating continents can move in the next millions of years. One story says that part of California will migrate to Alaska, said Blue, and Africa and Europe will move into each other, removing all but traces of the Mediterranean Sea. These are future stories for another night, and those with fresh eyes can more carefully explore the moving continents to see what they are adding to Time's encyclopedia. Let's return to the North Cascades point of time and continue the North Cascade story, said Blue. The mild weather became too mild. Our Spokane Nature Corridor skies were rainless. Streams and many plants and animals along the streams disappeared. Don't forget to tell about the new trees that did well with the rainless skies, said Cottonwood. Ponderosa Pine, said Great Blue, decided this was a good place for self-development. Ponderosa set out creating vast pine forest over the land without streams. Using Time's encyclopedia, Ponderosa developed into hardy, drought-resistant trees. Ponderosa pine could even live on the west-facing slopes exposed to hot summer sun and drying southwest wind. Some say ponderosa's pine needles, green bundles of 3, were a brilliant choice of leaf size and shape. Some even say this is how 3 came to be such a famous number. Another tree, redwood, also did quite well during this time of drought. Redwood had migrated to the highlands. These giant trees found the cooler air and moisture of Idaho's mountains a good place to live. The weather was soon going to change again, said Blue. And the next story is about volcanoes, what they chose to develop. Cascade Mountain Formation. 25 million and 3 BC, Cascade Mountain volcanoes. Up until this time, said Great Blue, for millions of years, much of our Spokane Nature Corridor was under the Pacific Ocean. Then, hundreds of miles from shore, the ocean began to boil, bubble, and steam. Volcanic islands began to form. Great masses of land were pushed up from the ocean. Large volcanoes from Canada into California were erupting. Eruption after eruption brought tons of ash to the sky. These massive eruptions and upward movement of the land formed what is called the Cascade Mountain Range, the Cascades for short. I know these snow-capped giants, said Hummingbird. Mount Garibaldi, Glacier Peak, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, Mount Hood, Mount Tyson, Crater Lake, Mount Shasta, and Lassen Peak are today's names for some of these Cascade volcanoes. Their white crests tower over the evergreen mountain ridges of the Cascades. Green and blue glacial lakes glisten from ridge pockets. A great place for a trail. The Pacific Crest Trail, said Elk, a magnificent 2,638-mile trail, starting in British Columbia, following the Cascades to the high Sierra, and onto the desert of Southern California to the California-Mexico border. Also around this time, said Great Blue, the Olympic Mountains and parts of the Mountain Coast Range were being pushed up from under the ocean. From a deep blue ocean to a volcanic mountain range, said Bitterroot, and mountains from the seafloor. Who would have thought this was possible? I wonder how many other ways Times Encyclopedia records for forming mountains. What comments did Great Blue hear when the story was told before its time? When the story was told long ago, said Great Blue, there were many that claimed to know better. Some said Spokane has always been on the Pacific Ocean. It always rains here on the Pacific coast. How could there be ice-covered mountains where there is now ocean? What kind of fantastic stories are these? Others asked. I didn't tell him that Antarctica, which was once part of Africa, had migrated to the South Pole, was now covered with glaciers. Nor did I tell them of today, said Blue, where several hundred miles from the Oregon coast, the ocean again bubbles and boils as new underwater volcanoes erupt. That's another story. Let's go back to the time when the Cascade Mountains were developing themselves. The massive eruptions forming the Cascade Mountains blackened the sky with volcanic ash. Ash rained from the sky. The climate became warm and wet as these volcanoes formed a climatic barrier that brought new weather patterns, said Blue. How did weather patterns change as the mountains formed? Asked Cricket. How did the plants and animals migrate to these new lands? What plants and animals lived there? Part of the answer to these good questions is found in the ginkgo forest of the time, said Blue. And this is a ginkgo forest story.